If you're struggling to know whether you have a strong board in the early game, or you're finding yourself mostly going on loose streaks in stage 2 and 3, then this video is going to be for you. We're going to look at the strongest opening boards you can build so that you know what units to look out for, and make the early game as smooth as possible so that you can transition easily into the mid game. Let's get into it. So before we get into the different boards, we're first going to go through a tier list of 1-cost headliners so that you know what are the best units to build your opening boards around. This is going to be ranked based on their strength in opening comps rather than their actual individual strength. For example, Corki Headliner is actually quite a strong unit, but he doesn't fit into the strongest opening boards, so he will be ranked lower. Starting off with Annie, both versions of the Annie Headliner for me are S tier. He's a very strong 1-cost unit in itself and fits into a few of the strongest opening boards you can make, as well as the fact that Annie rerolling is in itself an A tier comp. She is an insta-buy if I see her in the shop. Next we have Corki, and as I've already mentioned, he is going to be down the bottom, as although he is a strong 1-cost headliner, it's difficult to build a strong opening board with him that can win streak early in the game. Similar situation with Evelyn. She's a weaker unit than Corki, but she does activate some better early game traits like KDA and Crowd Diver. So I'm going to put both of her headliner versions in the same tier as Corki. Now with Jinx, she is a strong headliner, as both Punk and Rapid Fire are quite strong early if you manage to get one item onto her. She's not exactly an insta-buy in the shop, so won't be S tier, but I'd be instantly considering picking her up if I see her in the shop, so she will go into the A tier. With Kennen, he is a strong unit and fits into some of the strongest opening boards you can make, but I don't really like getting him as a headliner, as he's better as a utility unit with his stun. I avoid both his True Damage and Guardian versions, as there's just so many better headliner options, but the Superfan version does let you hit that free item straight away, which is a big boost in board strength in stage 2, so I'll put him like this. Next we have Cassante, and as we're rating based on the possible board strength, not how good or bad the unit is, his Heartsteel version is definitely going to be in D tier, as the whole point of that trait is to lose rounds, and this scale is to increase the chance of winning rounds. His Sentinel version is a solid tank though, so can go into C. With Lilia, it's going to be the same as Kennen. I'd be happy to get a Superfan version, but not so much the Sentinel or KDA version, as those traits don't fit in well into the strong opening boards that we're going to go through. Now Nami is a powerhouse of a 1-cost headliner. Although Disco isn't strong late game, it's insanely strong in the early game, and if you see a Disco version of this, I'm insta-buying it. The Dazzler version I'd only insta-buy if I already got dropped a Gragas from Loot Orbs, but it's still a solid pickup, so we'll go into A. Olaf is similar to Annie as well. He is a very strong unit regardless of the headliner version, and fits into the strongest boards you can make in the opening rounds, so I'll insta-buy either version if I see it, straight into S tier. Taric is going to be similar to Nami, but just a little bit weaker. I'd insta-buy his Disco version if I already have a Nami, so that goes into A tier, but I wouldn't be keen on picking up his Guardian version unless I had a Gragas to activate Disco. With Tahm Kench, he's really only good with Country, but if you do manage to activate Country, it is a very strong opening board, so his Country version goes in at A, but his Bruiser I'd stick in at C, as the chances of you getting dropped 2 other Country units is very low, as they're both 2 and 3 cost units. Now Mosher Vi is the only unit I'm going to put in S tier solely due to her individual strength. She's a very strong unit early on and can carry fights on her own with one item in stage 2, so she goes straight in at S tier, but the Punk version is really only strong if you find 2 other Punk units, so I'd say that is B tier. And finally Yasuo. Although reroll Yasuo is a viable strategy which earns some points to go up higher on this list, it's really not a strong unit early on, and if you're focusing solely on getting the strongest start possible, I wouldn't be picking him. Now you know the strongest 1-cost headliners, we're going to go through the strongest boards. I've selected these boards based on the stats pulled by Meta TFT, which analyses the win rate of rounds specifically for stage 2, and all of these have a higher chance of winning than the rest. So first up we have Pentakill Bruiser, with Olaf as your headliner and activating both the Pentakill and Bruiser traits. Olaf is one of, if not the best 1-cost headliner units you can find. He's an insta-buy if you ever see him in your shop in the opening rounds, and will carry you through stage 2 with ease with any AD item like BT or Titans. Both the Bruiser and Pentakill versions of his headliner are strong early, and if you manage to activate both traits, it has a nearly 60% round win rate in stage 2. It doesn't matter what Pentakill or Bruiser units you find to activate the traits, but it's especially strong if you find Set and Gnar, as it activates both Bruiser, Pentakill and Mosher. This comp also sets you up nicely to go into Pentakill Kayle reroll, or even just Pentakill Karthus Akali at level 8, but if you find multiple copies of Olaf, in addition to the headliner, you can also go Olaf reroll, which is quite strong, especially if you find the too big to fail augment on 2-1. Next we have a Country Bruiser board with either 3 Country units or 2 Country units plus Tahm Kench as a Country headliner. This can be something like Country Tahm Kench headliner plus Cat, Olaf and Set, or Bruiser Tom or Olaf headliner with Cat and Samira or Urgot. Country is strong early because Hecarim enters the battlefield to provide extra frontline and damage, which is strong early, and unless you go up against someone with an entire team of 2-starred units, you're going to struggle to lose a round. With Country falling off in the meta recently, I wouldn't look at committing to Country for the whole game, and instead look at transitioning out later on into something like Moshers or AD Flex with Ezreal or Caitlyn as your carry. Next we have our first AP opener, which is Headliner Annie plus Superfans. Emo Annie is the best version of the headliner, plus Ken and Lilia and either Nico or Nar to activate Superfan. Annie is a strong early game unit and a viable reroll comp if you manage to find additional copies of her early on. If you manage to get 1 or 2 AP items on her, she should carry you through the early game, and later on you can transition into something like KDA Ari, Senna, or even Seraphine reroll, and even the Pentakill cardless comp if you can't find any others. Another Annie comp you can play, which is slightly weaker, is Spellweaver Bruisers. This looks to play Annie headliner with Gragas plus another Bruiser to activate Bruiser and Spellweaver. This is probably the weakest of the strongest early game boards in this video, with a 55% round win rate, but should still fare well against most boards and save you a lot of health in the early game. I'd look to transition out of it and into Superfan if you can, as it will perform a lot better and you're more likely to win rounds. This next comp is one of the most frustrating to play against early, with Mosher Vi headliner as your main board strength and adding in Jax and Nar to activate 4 Mosher. Vi is very strong early, as she is one of the few units with a stun in her ability in the early stages of the game. This is particularly strong early due to the fact that most units are quite squishy due to the lack of items, meaning that one stun can mean the enemy unit dies before performing their ability. If you can activate 4 Mosher plus put in a punk unit like Jinx, then this has a 62% round win rate in stage 2, meaning you're very likely to go on a win streak and be very healthy going into stage 3. If you find Submit to the Pit on 2-1, you can also look at committing to Moshers and go and reroll Jax or Urgot, which is a very consistent top 4 comp with the Augment. Sticking with Punk still, another Punk comp, but this time activating 4 Punk and 2 Rapid Fire with headliner Jinx. This is slightly weaker than the Mosher comp, but it still has a good round win rate in stage 2, and you can look at committing to playing Punk early on if you find additional copies of Jinx. I personally don't like committing to Punk as a comp for the whole game, as I feel it never really gets you going to first unless you find a Punk spat and hit 3-star Jinx very early, but it is still a good comp to play throughout stage 2 and some of stage 3. If you get this start and know you're not going to play it for the whole game, then make sure not to use the Punk reroll for 1 gold, as it will only set you back in econ. And finally, the strongest early game comp by far, which is Disco. Although Disco isn't an S tier comp in the late game anymore, it's still the strongest board at stages 2 and is joint first for stage 3 as well. The reason it's so strong is due to the fact that early game fights are usually drawn out due to boards being a lot weaker than in the later stages of the game. This means that the Disco Ball attack speed bonus has time to stack, making your board much stronger over time than the enemy's board. If you see a Disco headliner version of Taric or Nami, it should be an insta-buy if you want to win streak stage 2, then once you have activated 3 Disco, you can look at slotting in accompanying traits like Guardian or Dazzler to increase your board strength. As I mentioned, Disco isn't an S tier comp anymore, so I wouldn't look at committing to this comp in the later stages of the game unless you find BIS items for TF and an early unit like Ziggs, which signals you to play the comp. And that's it for this guide. If you found it helpful or want to see more, then please consider liking the video and subscribing, as it really supports the growth of the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.